Welcome, sleepy souls, to the Creepy Night Show. Tonight, I'm here to help you drift into deep, peaceful sleep. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more bedtime stories. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is right now. And if there's a story you'd like to hear next, I would love to know that too.
I've been sitting on this story for almost 2 years now. I tried writing it once before and deleted the whole thing halfway through. Not because I didn't want to share it, but because every time I typed it out, I started checking the locks on my doors. But here I am again. And this time, I'm finishing it. Fresh flowers, no flags, no little laminated photos, people taped to stones. Just old carved names slowly dissolving back into the rock. That night, on my 2 a.m. walk, I found fresh flowers sitting against a headstone in section 9, the white lilies. Crisp, like they'd been placed there within the hour that I stopped and looked at the stone. It read, Margaret Cold, beloved, 1901 to 1941. Nothing unusual about the name. Nothing unusual about the dates. I took a mental note and kept walking, but the next morning before I clocked out, I did something I'd never done in 6 years on the job. I pulled the cemetery's plot registry, a physical ledger we keep for legal records, and I looked up section 9. Margaret Cold was not in it. I checked twice. 3 times. I went back out to the grave in the gray morning light and read the stone again, letter by letter. Margaret Cold, clear as anything. She wasn't in the registry. That I told myself the records were old and incomplete. Some of the 1800s plots had gaps. I wrote it off. I went home. I slept 2 nights later. The flowers were fresh again. Same grave. New lilies. Same cold, perfect white. This time I did log it. And this time, I stayed near section 9 for a while, leaning against an oak tree at the far edge of the row, watching. An hour passed. Nothing. 2 hours. Nothing. By 4 a.m., I was cold and tired, and I told myself I was being ridiculous, and I went back to the maintenance shed. The next night, I came in early and checked the cemetery's entrance camera footage. We only have 2 cameras, both pointed at the main gate. The footage from the previous night showed the gate locked and undisturbed from 10 p.m. all the way through to 6 a.m. Nobody came in. Nobody came in through the front gate, and the perimeter fence is 8 feet of wrought iron with no gaps I've ever found. I've walked every inch of it, and yet someone or something was getting fresh flowers onto a grave that officially did not exist. I started researching Margaret Cold. This is where it got under my skin in a way that the flowers alone hadn't. Because I found her, not in any cemetery record, but in a local newspaper archive. A digitized edition of the Harlow County Gazette from November 1941. The headline read, Local woman missing, search called off. Margaret Cold, age 40, had disappeared from her home on Elbier Road in October of 1941. She lived alone. No husband, no children. Her nearest neighbor reported not seeing her for 2 weeks. The sheriff's department conducted a brief search. No body was ever found. The article was 4 paragraphs long, buried on page 7, and as far as I could tell, no follow-up was ever published. She was never confirmed dead, which meant, logically, she was never buried. So why did she have a grave? I started asking the cemetery's daytime manager, Gerald, a quiet man in his 60s who'd worked Glenwood for over 30 years. I asked him casually, like I was just curious about old records. He told me the plot registry had been partially reconstructed in the 1970s after a fire damaged the original documents. It was possible, he said, that some older plots had been entered incorrectly or incompletely. He didn't seem concerned I didn't tell him about the flowers. October came. The flowers kept appearing. Not every night. That would have been almost easier to deal with. It was the irregularity that wore me down. 3 nights in a row, then nothing for a week. Then twice in one night. I'd walk past the grave at midnight with nothing, and by 2 a.m., there'd be a fresh bundle propped against the stone. I set up my phone on a small portable stand, pointed at the grave, recording on a motion-sensing app I downloaded. I did this on a Thursday night. Friday morning, I pulled the footage. Motion had triggered the recording at 3:17 a.m. I watched it with my breakfast coffee going cold beside me. The footage was dark, but the phone had a decent night mode. You could see the grave clearly. And at 3:17 a.m., the footage showed the lilies already there, already placed. The motion that triggered the recording wasn't a person approaching the grave. That IT was the flowers moving, just slightly, like something beneath the ground had shifted and disturbed the soil around the stone. A small, slow movement. The kind of thing you'd see if the earth above a casket settled. Except Margaret Cold was never buried there. That I almost quit that week. I genuinely typed up a resignation and saved it in my drafts. But I didn't send it, and I still can't fully explain why. Part of me needed to know. That's the curse of being the kind of person who doesn't scare easily. When something finally scares you, you lean into it instead of away from it, because you don't know how to do anything else that is, on the last Friday of October, I did something I hadn't done before. Instead of watching from a distance, I sat directly beside Margaret Cold's grave. Midnight, thermos of coffee, notebook in my lap. I was going to stay until sunrise if I had to. At T1 a.m., nothing to T2 a.m., nothing T3 a.m. I felt it before I saw anything. A vibration in the ground beneath me. Faint, rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat. And then I noticed the smell. Lilies, strong and sweet, and completely out of place in the cold October air. That I looked down. There were flowers in my lap. White lilies, fresh cut, sitting across my knees. I had not heard a single sound. I had not looked away from the grave for more than a few seconds. And somehow, in the dark, in the silence, someone had placed flowers in my lap like a gift. Or a warning. That I stood up so fast I knocked my thermos over. I swept my flashlight in a full circle. The cemetery stretched out in every direction. Pale stones, bare trees, still air. Not a single person visible for as far as the light reached. But right there, carved into the base of Margaret Cold's headstone, in letters I had never noticed before, letters that looked freshly cut, bright white against the old dark stone, were 2 words. She waits and I'm still working the job. I know how that sounds. The flowers still come. I've stopped trying to document them. I've stopped sitting by the grave. I do my rounds. I keep my distance from Section 9 after 1 a.m., and I try not to think too hard about what she waits means, whether it means Margaret is waiting in that grave, or whether it means something else is waiting. Waiting for me, because last week I pulled up the old newspaper archive again, the one with the 1941 article about Margaret Cold going missing. This time I scrolled further. 3 pages past the original article. There was a follow-up I had never seen before. Dated December 1941. 6 lines long. The IT said the sheriff had re-examined the case. A neighbor came forward with new information. Margaret Cold, the neighbor claimed, had told her something strange in the weeks before she disappeared. She told her she'd been visiting a grave at Glenwood every night, that a grave with no name on it. A grave. She said she felt called to If you've read this far, I want you to know something. I went back to the registry this morning. I checked every plot in Section 9 again, that there's a new entry. Added sometime in the last 2 weeks. No name, no dates, just a plot number, that it's the one directly next to Margaret Cold. I want to start by saying my grandmother was the most normal woman I ever knew. She made sweet tea from scratch. She watched Wheel of Fortune every single night and yelled the answers at the TV before the contestants could. She kept a ceramic rooster on her kitchen counter that she'd owned since 1987, and she would not throw it away for anything. She smelled like lavender and cedar and the inside of old paperback books. She was normal. She was safe. She was the most comforting presence in my entire childhood, which is why it took me until she was gone, until I was standing in her house alone, going through her things, to realize I had never actually understood her at all. Let me give you the background that I grew up in Ashford, Tennessee. Small town. The kind of place where everybody knows your family name before they know yours. My grandmother, we called her Nana Ruth, lived 4 blocks from us. And from the time I was about 6 years old until I turned 16, she picked me up every Sunday morning and took me to Harlan Creek Cemetery on the edge of town. Every Sunday. Without fail. Rain, heat, the kind of Tennessee summer days where the air feels like wet cotton, it didn't matter. She'd pull up in her tan Buick at 9 a.m. sharp, and I'd get in and we'd drive the 12 minutes to Harlan Creek, and we'd walk the grounds that I never questioned it. Kids don't question things that feel like routine. It was just what Sundays were. Church with my parents in the morning, then Nana Ruth in the cemetery in the afternoon. She always brought flowers. Yellow ones, specifically black-eyed Susans when they were in season, yellow carnations when they weren't. She carried them in a paper-wrapped bundle, and she always walked the same path through the cemetery, past the old veterans section, left at the big magnolia tree, all the way to the back row, where the stones were older and the ground was softer, and the whole section sat under a canopy of oak trees so thick that even in summer it felt like dusk back there. She'd stop at the same grave every time that I never paid much attention to whose grave it was when I was little. It was just a stone. Nana Ruth would crouch down, arrange the flowers, sometimes whisper something I couldn't hear, and then she'd sit quietly for a few minutes. Sometimes she'd cry, not loudly, just a slow, quiet kind of crying, the kind adults do when they've had a lot of practice at it. Then she'd stand up, brush off her slacks, take my hand, and we'd walk back to the car, and she'd ask me about school, and things would be normal again. When I was about 12, I finally read The Stone. Thomas Allen Beckett, 1940 to 1971. Gone too soon? I asked her who Thomas Beckett was. She paused for just a second, barely noticeable, and said, "An old friend, sweetheart. Someone I knew a long time ago." I accepted that. I was 12. Old people had old friends who died. That was just life. I never asked again. Nana Ruth passed in March of 2021. She was 84, and she went peacefully in her sleep, which is the best any of us can hope for. I flew back to Ashford for the funeral and then stayed an extra week to help my mom sort through the house. That IT was in the cedar chest at the foot of Nana Ruth's bed. That I found the box. That IT was a shoebox. An old one, brittle brown cardboard held shut with a rubber band that snapped the moment I touched it. Inside was a collection of things that didn't immediately make sense. A stack of letters tied with kitchen twine. A photograph. A small brass key. A folded piece of paper that turned out to be a hand-drawn map. Crude, pencil-marked, with an X near what I gradually recognized as the back section of Harlan Creek Cemetery. I picked up the photograph first. IT was black and white, slightly overexposed, the way photos from the 1960s sometimes look. A man and a woman standing in front of a car. A convertible, something boxy and old. The man was tall, dark-haired, smiling like he owned the world. The woman was young and laughing and looking at him instead of the camera. The woman was my grandmother. I would have recognized her anywhere, even at whatever age she was in that photo. Mid-20s, maybe. Same eyes. Same angle of the jaw. I flipped it over. On the back, in her handwriting, Tom and me. April 1965. Thomas Beckett. Gone too soon. 1940. 1971. I sat on the floor of her bedroom for a long time. I read the letters that same night. My mom had gone to bed, and I sat at Nana Ruth's kitchen table with the ceramic rooster watching me, and I read every single one that they were love letters, spanning from 1963 to 1970, written by Thomas Beckett to my grandmother. Long, careful, beautiful letters, the kind people don't write anymore, full of detail and longing and a very specific kind of pain that I came to understand slowly as I read further. They were never together. Not officially, not openly, because when they met, when they fell in love, my grandmother was already married to my grandfather, Robert Caulfield, who I had known as a quiet, kind man who passed away when I was 4. The letters made clear this was a love that existed in the margins. Stolen hours. careful distances. A relationship that both of them knew could never be spoken out loud in a town like Ashford in 1963. Thomas died in 1971. One of the last letters, dated 4 months before his death, mentioned a diagnosis. He didn't use the word. He just wrote around it, the way people of that era sometimes did, as though naming it made it real that he died at 31. My grandmother was 34. She lived another 50 years. And every Sunday, for 10 of those years, she took me, her granddaughter, to sit with him. Never telling me why, never explaining. Just bringing her yellow flowers and her quiet tears and her 50 years of a secret too heavy to carry alone. But the letters weren't what shook me the deepest. The IT was the map. I almost didn't unfold it. I'd assumed it was just a rough guide to Thomas's plot, something she made years ago so she wouldn't forget the location. But when I opened it, I saw it wasn't just a map of the cemetery. It was more detailed than that. There were 2 X marks. Not 1.1 was where I knew Thomas Beckett's grave to be. Back row, under the oaks. The second X was deeper in. Further back than any section I remembered walking with Nana Ruth. Past the oak canopy, into what would have been, if I was reading the map correctly, a part of the cemetery that wasn't maintained. An older part. Written next to the second X in my grandmother's careful handwriting were 4 words, where Tom said to look at. I don't know how to explain the feeling that went through me when I read that. Something shifted. Something that had felt like a sad, beautiful love story a moment ago suddenly felt like something else. Something with a locked door behind it. I went to Harlan Creek Cemetery the next morning. Why Mom thought I was going to visit the family plots. I didn't correct her that I walked the familiar path, past the veterans section, left to the Magnolia. I stopped at Thomas Beckett's grave and stood there for a minute. Somebody had left yellow flowers recently. Not me, not my mom. Fresh yellow carnations, still crisp, though my grandmother had been dead for 2 weeks. I stood there and felt the back of my neck go cold. Then I kept walking, past the oak canopy, past the last maintained row, into the older section where the grass grew long and the stones were so weathered that most of them were unreadable. I counted my paces the way the map suggested. It was rough, hand-drawn, but it was clearly made by someone who'd walked this route many times. That I found the second X, that IT wasn't a grave or wasn't marked as one. There was no headstone, no marker of any kind, just a slightly sunken patch of earth, the way ground settles over years, and a single flat stone, not carved, not placed deliberately as far as I could tell, lying over the center of it. That I crouched down. I brushed the dirt off the flat stone. There were letters carved into the underside of it. Not professional, not a stonemason's work. Rough cut, like someone had done it with a hand tool, for when you're ready to know the truth. T.M.Y. grandmother had been walking to this spot for 10 years with me beside her. She had never once walked this far. She had never shown me this. She had kept this hidden for 50 years, and then she died and left the map in a shoebox for someone to find. For me to find out, I've hired a researcher who specializes in historical land records. She's been tracing the cemetery's back section, trying to determine what, or who, is buried under that patch of ground. What she found in the county records last week made her call me at 11 p.m. on a Thursday. She said the land in that section of Harlan Creek was purchased privately in 1971. The buyer's name on the deed? Not the cemetery, not the county. The deed was signed by Thomas Allen Beckett. 3 weeks before his death, he bought a plot of land inside the cemetery, off the official registry, and he had something placed there, or someone, and he left a message carved in stone for my grandmother to find. She found it. I know she did. The map is too detailed for someone who'd never stood there. She found it. She read it, and she spent the next 10 years walking me to the edge of that truth every single Sunday. And she never crossed the line. That I need to know why, that I'm going back next week with the researcher. We're going to dig. I'll post an update when I have one. If you don't hear from me within 2 weeks, check the Ashford County records under the name Caulfield, that you'll understand why. I want to be clear about something before I start. I am not a superstitious person, that I'm a 28-year-old woman with a history degree from the University of Michigan and a freelance photography career that pays my rent. I have spent the last 4 years documenting forgotten and abandoned cemeteries across the Midwest for a self-funded archive project I call the Unmarked. The whole point of the project is preservation, getting photographic records of headstones, epitaphs, and cemetery layouts before they disappear entirely. Some of these places are so overgrown that by the time I find them, half the stones are already underground again. That I have photographed over 60 abandoned cemeteries. I have been alone in all of them. I have never, not once, had an experience I couldn't explain until Hollow Ridge. I found Hollow Ridge Cemetery through a County Historical Society database in late August of 2023. It appeared in an 1887 land survey as a private family cemetery associated with a homestead called the Voss property, located about 11 miles outside of Delwood, Indiana, a town so small it barely qualifies as one. The cemetery had no formal address. The Historical Society had one photograph on record, taken 1953, showing a wrought iron gate and maybe a dozen visible headstones behind it. Their estimate. The property had been abandoned since the early 1960s when the last of the Voss family line died out. I drove out on a Tuesday in early September. The kind of day that feels like summer pretending to still be summer. Warm, but with a bite underneath it, the light already turning that flat amber September color that makes everything look like an old painting. I found the gate exactly where the survey coordinates suggested. The iron was almost fully consumed by rust and the surrounding vegetation. Wild grapevines had threaded through every bar so completely that the gate itself had essentially become part of the tree line. I had to cut my way through with a folding saw I keep in my kit for exactly this kind of situation. The cemetery beyond it was about 1/3 of an acre, maybe 30 headstones, varying in condition from readable to almost completely dissolved. The grass was waist-high in places. A massive oak tree had grown up through the center of the plot, roots buckling several of the older stones out of the ground at odd angles. It was beautiful, honestly, in the way that only genuinely forgotten places are beautiful. I set my bag down, assembled my tripod, and got to work. My process is methodical. I photograph each stone from 3 angles, straight on, 45 degrees from the left, 45 from the right, to capture both the text and any relief carving in the best possible light. Then I log the name, dates, and any epitaph in a field notebook. I work row by row, back to front, and I usually spend 3 to 4 hours on a site this size. Hollow Ridge took me closer to 5. Not because anything slowed me down, in fact the opposite. The stones were surprisingly well preserved for a site this neglected. The Voss family had clearly spent money on their dead. Thick granite markers, deep-cut lettering, several with elaborate carved borders. Wheat sheaves, weeping willows, the traditional iconography of 19th century American funerary art. I photographed 31 stones in total. I was packing on my tripod when I noticed the 3-2 and D. IT was set apart from the others, not in any of the rows, but pushed up against the far corner of the iron fence, half hidden behind a collapsed section of the perimeter. The stone was smaller than the others. Simpler, plain marble, roughly rectangular, with no carved border and no epitaph. Just a name and a year that I crossed the cemetery to photograph it. The name on the stone was Mara, just the one name. No family name, no birth year, only a death year, 1891. I photographed it from all 3 angles and logged in my notebook. I noted the single name, the missing birth year, the isolated placement. Then I capped my lens, shouldered my bag, and hiked back out to my car. I got home around 8 p.m. I made dinner, downloaded the day's photos to my laptop, and did a first pass through them, just checking exposure and focus before the serious editing session I do the next day. I almost missed it that I was scrolling quickly, thumbnail to thumbnail, and I almost kept going, but something in one image snagged my eye, and I stopped and went back. It was one of my 3 shots of the Mara stone, the straight-on photograph. My standard first angle. The stone was in the center of the frame, sharp and well exposed, exactly as I composed it. The collapsed fence section was visible in the background. The knee-high grass around the base of the stone was clear and still, and just behind the stone, half in shadow, half caught in the flat amber light of the late afternoon, There was a figure. I told myself immediately it was a trick of the light. Pareidolia, the brain's tendency to find faces and human shapes in random patterns. Photographers know about pareidolia better than most people. We see it in tree bark, in cloud formations, in the shadowed corners of old rooms. It's not supernatural. It's just pattern recognition, misfiring. Oh, I told myself that. And then I zoomed in. It wasn't pareidolia. It was a figure. A woman, from what I could tell, slight, standing very still, positioned directly behind the Mara stone, as though she'd stepped up behind it at the exact moment I fired the shutter. She was in partial shadow, but her outline was sharp. Her dress, if it was a dress, was dark and shapeless in the way of old photographs. The kind of formless dark clothing women wore in the late 1800s. Her face was turned toward the camera. Toward me that I sat at my desk for a long time and just breathed. Then I made myself look closer. I told myself I would find the logical explanation. A reflection, maybe, but there was no reflective surface. A double exposure. But I shoot digital, there are no double exposures. Another person who'd entered the cemetery behind me. But I cut through a gate woven solid with vines, and no one had come through that gate behind me. I zoomed in further. And that's when the logical part of my brain went completely quiet. Because the face in the photograph, the woman's face slightly blurred by shadow, but visible, distinctly and unmistakably visible, was my face. My own features. My own jaw, my own eyes, my own particular arrangement of a face that I have looked at in mirrors my whole life. Looking back at me from a photograph taken in an abandoned Indiana cemetery from a spot where nobody was standing, did I close the laptop, that I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I did what any rational person does when something irrational happens. I started researching. I contacted the Delwood Historical Society. I emailed the Indiana State Library's genealogy division. I spent 6 hours going through digitized county records. What I found about the Voss family was ordinary enough. German immigrant farmers, settled in Delwood County in the 1860s, moderately prosperous, all accounted for in the census records right up until the last of the family. And Ernst Voss died in 1961, but Mara wasn't in any census in Omara Voss. No Mara, anything connected to the property. No birth record, no death record, despite the year on the stone. No mention in any newspaper archive I could find. The Voss family, despite being reasonably well documented, had apparently buried someone named Mara in their private cemetery in 1891. Someone with no last name and no paper trail. And left absolutely no explanation that I reached out to a genealogist who specializes in German-American settler communities in Indiana. She called me back within 24 hours, which I took as a sign she'd found something worth calling about quickly. She told me that in some German immigrant communities in rural Indiana in the late 19th century, there was a documented practice, rare but real, of burying individuals outside the family rows of a private cemetery when the family considered that person's death to carry some kind of spiritual consequence. A marker with only a given name, no family name, was deliberate, a way of recording the death without formally claiming the person as kin. I asked her what would cause a family to do that. She paused. Then she told me that in the records she'd found, a church deacon's private journal from Delwood County, dated 1891, there was a single entry referencing the Voss property. The deacon wrote that the family had buried a young woman, a distant relation newly arrived from Germany, who had died under circumstances the family refused to explain. The journal entry said only that the woman had been found in the family's barn, and that in the weeks before her death, several members of the Voss family reported seeing her in places she could not have been, standing in the field when she was known to be inside the house, watching from the tree line, appearing in the background of a formal family photograph taken by a traveling photographer in August of 1891, standing behind the family, in a spot where no one had been standing that I have not been, back to Hollow Ridge. But I've gone back to my photographs, all 31 standard stones, all the careful, methodical angles. I've gone through every single image looking for anything I missed on my first pass. That I found two things. The first, in a photograph of a stone in the second row, a stone belonging to one Heinrich Voss, died 1902, There's a shadow falling across the lower left corner of the frame that does not correspond to any object in the shot. The sun position that afternoon would have cast shadows to the right. This shadow falls left. It is shaped, roughly, like a person standing just outside the frame. The second thing I found is harder to explain and harder to look at. In my very first photograph of the day, the establishing wide shot I take of every cemetery when I arrive, before I begin the individual stones, there's something I didn't notice when I took a tee in the far corner of the frame, near the collapsed fence, barely visible in the long grass. The Mara stone is in the shot. I can see it clearly now that I know where to look, and standing beside it, partially obscured by the oak tree's shadow, small, dark-dressed, face turned toward the camera. She was there when I arrived. She was there before I ever found her stone, before I ever crossed the cemetery, before I ever looked up and realized, in some part of my brain I don't have a name for, that I already knew exactly where that corner was. That my feet had carried me there like I'd walked that path before. Like something had been waiting for me specifically, like it recognized me. Like it had always known I was coming. That I sent the photographs to 3 separate digital forensics analysts. All 3 confirmed no evidence of manipulation. Last week I received an email from the Indiana genealogist. She'd found something additional in the Deacon's journal, a physical description of a young woman buried as Mara that I read at once. I haven't been able to read it again. It describes her height, her build, the particular color of her eyes. Every detail is mine.